Welcome to the world of daily life stories. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss new stories. Enjoy listening. An unshakable presence. The hum of airport life swirled through the air as Dr. Amara Bennett wheeled her suitcase toward the first-class lounge at Seattle International Airport. A renowned civil rights advocate and the first Black woman to head the Global Equity Alliance, Amara was no stranger to the demands of international travel. Yet today, as she prepared for her keynote at a global summit on justice and human rights, a strange weight pressed against her spirit. Maybe it was the significance of the event, a rare opportunity to push for policy changes on a global scale, or perhaps it was the exhaustion of years spent advocating for change in spaces resistant to her presence. She adjusted her blazer and strode toward the frosted glass doors of the lounge, exuding the quiet confidence of someone who had carved a path through unyielding stone. Her access card beeped as she swiped it, the electronic chime granting her entry into the sanctuary beyond. Inside, the noise of the bustling terminal melted away, replaced by the soft clinks of ceramic cups and the soothing notes of piano music. A sanctuary designed for the elite, the lounge offered plush leather chairs, curated artwork, and an air of exclusivity that often felt more fragile than substantial. Amara made her way to a quiet corner near the large bay windows, choosing a seat that offered a clear view of the runway. She always liked watching planes, vessels that defied gravity and carried their passengers to new horizons. It reminded her of the battles she'd fought to soar past barriers others tried to place in her path. As she settled into her seat, the subtle shift in the room's energy did not escape her notice. A man in a tailored navy suit glanced up from his laptop, his gaze lingering a moment too long. A woman at the nearby coffee station adjusted her scarf, stealing a second look in Amara's direction. The micro-reactions were subtle, but telling. Amara smiled faintly to herself, pulling her laptop from her bag. After decades of navigating spaces where she was both celebrated and questioned, she had developed an unerring ability to read a room. The glances didn't bother her, not today, not when her mind was occupied with refining a speech that could spark global change. Her phone buzzed on the table, a message from her assistant, Nina, "Don't forget to hydrate. The world needs your voice tomorrow." Amara chuckled softly and typed a quick reply. Nina was more than an assistant, she was a force of nature who often served as Amara's grounding rod in the chaos of advocacy work. The lounge attendant approached, her polished uniform impeccable. "Would you like coffee or tea, ma'am?" "Coffee, please," Amara replied, her voice warm but measured. As the attendant walked away, Amara caught the faintest flicker of hesitation in her demeanor, a tiny pause that suggested a question left unspoken. She was used to that too. Her tailored suit, her designer luggage, and even her calm confidence sometimes weren't enough to quiet the internal biases people carried. Amara opened her laptop, diving into the final draft of her speech. Her keynote centered on the dismantling of systemic barriers, economic, racial, gendered, and her words needed to resonate not just with activists but with lawmakers and CEOs. As she reviewed her notes, the lounge began to fill. Business travelers with matching luggage rolled in, their murmured conversations blending with the hum of the room. The mood shifted as a pair of men in gray suits entered and took seats nearby. Their tones were low, but Amara's ears picked up fragments of their conversation. "Is she? Doesn't look like." The rest was muffled, but Amara didn't need to hear the words to understand the subtext. She didn't belong in their eyes. She kept her gaze fixed on her screen, her fingers moving deftly across the keyboard as she adjusted the phrasing in her introduction. Over the years, she'd perfected the art of focus, turning other people's doubts into fuel. Still, the familiar sting of indignity settled in her chest like an unwelcome guest. A shift in atmosphere. By the time the coffee arrived, the whispers had spread. Amara was aware of how the lounge attendants glanced in her direction more often than was necessary. When one approached her seat, Amara wasn't surprised. "Excuse me, ma'am," the attendant said, her tone polite but edged with uncertainty. "Can I see your lounge credentials?" Amara's gaze met the young woman's, steady and calm. "Of course." She retrieved her access card from the side pocket of her bag and handed it over. The attendant examined it closely, her brow furrowing ever so slightly, before she handed it back. "Thank you, ma'am," she said, her voice almost too quiet. Amara nodded and returned to her laptop, but the air in the lounge felt heavier. She could feel the weight of eyes on her back, the unspoken questions multiplying. Why was she here? Did she belong? The doubts weren't hers, they were theirs. A brewing storm. Minutes later, as Amara was reviewing the summit's agenda, a second attendant approached, accompanied by a tall man in a neatly pressed suit. His name tag read Michael, supervisor. "Ma'am," he began, his voice a mix of authority and discomfort, "we need to confirm your access to the lounge. Could we see additional identification?" Amara set her laptop aside with deliberate care. "Is there a reason my initial access card isn't sufficient?" Michael hesitated, his eyes flicking to his colleagues as if searching for support. "We just want to make sure everything is in order." Around them, the murmur of the lounge had quieted. A woman with a tablet paused mid-scroll, clearly eavesdropping. A businessman at the bar stirred his drink a bit too slowly. Amara reached for her wallet and produced her passport and boarding pass, laying them neatly on the table. "Here's my ID and my flight information." The supervisor took them, glancing at the documents before retreating to consult with another staff member. The entire room seemed to hold its breath, and Amara felt the familiar mix of frustration and determination rising within her. She glanced at the screen of her laptop, where the title of her keynote shone brightly, "Breaking Barriers, Redefining Access and Opportunity in a Divided World." The irony was almost too sharp to bear. Standing ground. The lounge was no longer the peaceful sanctuary Amara had walked into. Instead, it had become a theater of judgment, where every sideways glance and whisper became part of the chorus of doubt that seemed to hum louder with every passing second. As Michael and the attendants huddled nearby, speaking in hushed tones over her credentials, Amara took a steadying breath. She wasn't just a traveler in this moment, she was a symbol, and she knew it. This wasn't the first time she had been made to justify her presence in spaces she had earned. It wouldn't be the last. But this time, she felt the weight of an audience. Across the room, a mother distractedly rocked her baby, casting quick glances in Amara's direction. The young professional seated 2 tables away had stopped typing altogether, her fingers hovering uncertainly above her keyboard. Even the elderly couple by the windows appeared transfixed, their whispered conversation halting as their attention shifted fully to the growing confrontation. Amara straightened her blazer and crossed her legs, her posture calm and composed, despite the tension simmering in the room. She glanced at the supervisor, Michael, who was now gesturing toward her boarding pass and speaking animatedly to the younger attendant, Rebecca. The conversation was clearly one-sided, Rebecca nodding with a mix of uncertainty and deference. A new challenger approaches. Amara's phone buzzed against the table, a text from Nina appearing on the screen. "Everything okay? You're cutting it close for your next meeting. Want me to call the lounge?" The idea of Nina storming in with her fierce energy brought a fleeting smile to Amara's lips. She typed a quick response, "All good. Just sorting a small misunderstanding." But was it really small? As much as Amara tried to downplay it, she knew that this was bigger than a misunderstanding. It was about belonging, about assumptions, and about the subtle but pervasive ways prejudice lingered even in spaces designed to exclude it. When Michael finally returned, his posture was rigid, his expression carefully neutral. He placed her documents on the table with precise movements, but his words cut through the air with the force of an unexpected gust. "Ma'am," he said, clearing his throat, "we've reviewed your credentials. Everything appears to be in order. However, we'd appreciate it if you could clarify the purpose of your visit to the lounge." Amara blinked. For a moment, the absurdity of the question rendered her speechless. Around her, the quiet lounge seemed to hold its collective breath. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice calm but deliberate. "Are you asking why I'm here?" Michael shifted uncomfortably, the weight of the room's attention now pressing on him as much as it was on her. "We simply need to ensure that all our guests are utilizing the lounge for appropriate purposes." A sharp, incredulous laugh bubbled up in Amara's throat, but she suppressed it, her years of experience keeping her response measured. She glanced at the table where her open laptop sat, displaying a neatly formatted slide deck titled Global Equity and the Future of Justice. Her passport, with its array of international stamps, lay beside it, along with her boarding pass, clearly marked with first-class seating. "What purpose do you think I have here?" she asked, tilting her head slightly. Michael hesitated, the room's silence amplifying the moment. A young man by the espresso machine shifted awkwardly, his gaze fixed on the frothy milk in his cup. Speaking truth to power. Amara leaned forward, her eyes locking onto Michael's. Her voice was calm, but carried a weight that resonated with those who heard it. "I'm here because I've earned the right to be here," she said. "Just like every other traveler in this lounge. My credentials meet your standards. My documents are valid. And yet, here I am, being asked to explain myself in a way that I doubt anyone else in this room has been asked to do." Michael opened his mouth to respond, but Amara held up a hand, her tone sharpening. "No, let's talk about this. Because what you're really asking, what this whole situation is asking, is whether someone like me belongs in a space like this." The air in the lounge seemed to shift, the unspoken truth hanging in the space between her words. "And let me tell you," Amara continued, her voice steady but rising with conviction, "I have spent my entire life navigating spaces where people have questioned my right to exist. Whether it was in classrooms, boardrooms, or places like this, I've been met with the same unspoken question, do you belong?" A ripple effect. The quiet audience was no longer pretending to ignore the exchange. A businessman near the back adjusted his tie, his discomfort palpable. The young professional with the laptop sat motionless, her eyes wide with what looked like admiration. Even the mother with the baby seemed to freeze, her rocking momentarily halted. Michael's face reddened slightly, but Amara wasn't finished. "And every time, I've answered that question the same way, by continuing to show up, by succeeding in the spaces that weren't built with me in mind, and by proving, again and again, that I deserve to be exactly where I am." Her words carried across the room, sharp and precise, leaving no room for doubt. Amara could feel the shift in the atmosphere, the weight of her conviction cutting through the tension like a blade. A quiet moment of triumph. Michael cleared his throat. "I apologize if this has caused any inconvenience," he said, his tone softer now, almost deferential. "You're, of course, welcome to remain here." Amara nodded, her calm composure unwavering. "Thank you. I trust there won't be any further misunderstandings." Michael nodded stiffly and retreated, gesturing for Rebecca and the other staff to follow him. The group moved toward the far end of the lounge, their voices dropping to hushed tones. Amara exhaled slowly, the tension in her shoulders releasing. She glanced around the room, meeting the eyes of the businessman, the young professional, and the elderly couple. One by one, they looked away, but not before their expressions conveyed something new: respect, admiration, and perhaps even shame. As Amara returned to her laptop, the weight of the moment lingered. She hadn't planned to deliver a speech before the summit, but she had anyway. In a way, the words she'd spoken here were just as important as the ones she'd prepared for tomorrow. Her phone buzzed again. Nina had sent another text, "You okay? You're cutting it close." Amara smiled faintly and typed a reply, "All good. Just broke a barrier. On my way soon." She sipped the last of her now cold coffee, glancing at her speech draft with renewed focus. Tomorrow, she would stand on a much larger stage, but today's impromptu confrontation had reminded her of something vital. Real change didn't just happen in conferences or on podiums. Sometimes, it started with simply refusing to move. The ripple of courage. The lounge began to return to its usual rhythm, at least on the surface. The gentle hum of conversation resumed, and the attendants scurried away to tend to other travelers. Yet, the energy in the room remained charged, as if the echoes of Amara's words still lingered in the air. Amara sat back in her chair, her composure unwavering, despite the intensity of the exchange. She opened her laptop again, the screen glowing with the unfinished presentation for the summit. But she couldn't focus, not yet. Her thoughts churned, not with anger, but with a deep, familiar resolve. She glanced toward the window, where planes taxied across the tarmac. Each one carried its own microcosm of stories, lives intersecting in ways both ordinary and extraordinary. Today, her own story had unfolded in this lounge, and she could feel its ripples spreading in ways she couldn't yet fully grasp. An unexpected ally. "Excuse me." The voice was soft but firm. Amara looked up to see the young professional who had been seated a few tables away. She appeared nervous, clutching her laptop bag with one hand and smoothing her blazer with the other. "I just wanted to say," the young woman hesitated, her cheeks flushing. "That was incredible. The way you handled all of that." Amara offered a small, encouraging smile. "Thank you. I just spoke the truth." The woman nodded, her expression earnest. I've seen things like that happen before, but I've never known what to do. I didn't want to make things worse by saying the wrong thing or drawing more attention to it." "That's understandable," Amara said gently. "It's not always easy to know how to respond. But even noticing it, acknowledging it, that's a start. Change begins with awareness." The woman's eyes brightened slightly. "I'm Sam, by the way. I work in tech, cybersecurity." She hesitated, then added, "If there's ever a way I can help. I mean, with what you do, your work. It sounds like you're doing something important." Amara extended a hand. "Amara Bennett. I'm with the Global Equity Initiative. And cybersecurity is important, Sam. Everyone has a role to play in creating a more just world. Sometimes it's about protecting the spaces where voices can be heard." Sam shook her hand, her grip firm. "If you ever need a digital ally, let me know." They exchanged contact information, and as Sam walked away, Amara felt a flicker of hope. Even small gestures, like this conversation, could spark something bigger. A growing audience. Amara wasn't alone for long. As she returned to her notes, she noticed another figure approaching, an older man in a tailored suit. He cleared his throat, his face a mix of embarrassment and determination. "I just wanted to apologize," he said, his voice low. "For earlier. For not stepping in." Amara studied him for a moment, gauging his sincerity. "What stopped you?" He sighed, running a hand through his silver hair. "Habit, I suppose. Years of minding my own business, telling myself it's not my place." But watching what just happened, he trailed off, shaking his head. "It's hard to ignore the truth when it's staring you in the face." Amara nodded slowly. "Change doesn't come from a single action. It comes from the decisions we make every day. Next time, speak up. Use your voice. You never know who might need it." The man's expression softened, and he nodded. "Thank you for reminding me of that." As he returned to his seat, Amara felt the subtle shift in the lounge's atmosphere. What had begun as a moment of confrontation was becoming something more, a quiet but powerful awakening. A supervisor's reflection. Not long after, Michael, the lounge supervisor, returned, his posture more hesitant this time. He approached Amara cautiously, his hands clasped in front of him. "Ms. Bennett," he began, his voice subdued, "I wanted to personally apologize for what happened earlier. It was handled poorly, and I take responsibility for that." Amara regarded him with a steady gaze. "Why did it happen, Michael?" He hesitated, clearly caught off guard by the directness of her question. I suppose we've been trained to err on the side of caution. But that's not an excuse. We should have treated you with more respect." "Caution isn't the problem," Amara said. "It's the assumptions behind it. Who do you see as deserving of caution, and who do you see as deserving of trust? Those questions shape how you treat people, even if you don't realize it." Michael nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. "I'll make sure we have a conversation about this with the staff. We need to do better." Amara leaned back, her voice softening slightly. "Doing better starts with asking the hard questions, not just of your staff, but of yourself. Why did you assume I didn't belong here? And what are you going to do to ensure the next person isn't put through this? Michael didn't have an answer, but the weight of her words was clear in his expression. The power of witness. As the lounge settled back into a semblance of normalcy, Amara returned to her laptop. She felt the stares lingering on her, but they no longer carried the weight of judgment. Instead, they felt different, curious, contemplative, even admiring. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from Marcus. Just saw a clip on social media. Someone recorded what happened in the lounge. It's already going viral. You okay? Amara blinked, her heart skipping a beat. She quickly opened her browser, searching for the video. Sure enough, there it was, a shaky but clear recording of her confrontation with the lounge staff, accompanied by captions highlighting the key moments. The comments were already pouring in. This woman is incredible. Such grace and strength. It's 2024, and this is still happening? Her speech gave me chills. We need more leaders like her. Amara set her phone down, her mind whirring. She hadn't planned for this moment to go public, but perhaps it was for the best. If her experience could spark conversations, challenge assumptions, and inspire action, then it was worth it. The summit tomorrow would still be her primary stage, but this impromptu moment in the lounge had already made waves. It was a reminder that the fight for justice wasn't confined to grand speeches or formal events, it lived in the small, everyday battles, too. Amara glanced around the lounge one last time. Some of the faces that had watched her earlier now offered small, hesitant smiles or respectful nods. She returned the gestures, her resolve solidified. The world was watching, and she was ready to lead. A triumph beyond words. The sun climbed higher in the sky, casting a golden glow over the lounge. Amara sat in her chair, staring out the window as planes ascended into the clouds. The buzz of voices and muted footsteps filled the air, but she was lost in thought. The events of the morning had taken a toll, but they had also reignited her purpose. She closed her laptop and leaned back, letting the moment settle around her. Tomorrow's summit loomed large, but something about today felt equally significant. The words she had spoken, the stance she had taken, they weren't just for herself. They were for every person who had ever been made to feel small, unwelcome, or less than. Her phone buzzed on the table, pulling her from her reverie. It was Marcus again. The video's everywhere. News outlets are picking it up. They're calling you the voice of dignity. What should we do? Amara smiled wryly at the nickname. She tapped out a quick response. We use it. Make sure the conversation stays focused on the issues, not just me. She had no interest in fame for fame's sake. This moment wasn't about her, it was about what her story represented. An unexpected invitation. A tap on her shoulder startled her. She turned to find Michael, the lounge supervisor, standing there again. He looked different this time, less composed, more uncertain. Ms. Bennett, he began, his voice quieter than before, I was wondering if you'd be willing to speak to our staff. Amara raised an eyebrow. Speak to them about what? Michael shifted on his feet. About what happened here. About how we can do better. I think hearing from someone like you might make a real difference. For a moment, Amara considered saying no. After all, she wasn't here to educate the staff of every place where bias reared its head. That wasn't her job. But then she thought about the ripples she had already created this morning. This could be another. I'll consider it, she said, her tone measured. But if I do, it won't be a lecture. It will be a conversation. Real change starts with dialogue, not monologues. Michael nodded, relief evident on his face. Thank you. I'll follow up with my team to make the arrangements. A flight of hope. As the morning wore on, Amara's flight was announced. She packed her belongings, her movements calm and deliberate, despite the lingering weight of the morning's events. She had been through so many moments like this, each one a reminder of how far the world still had to go, but also of how far she herself had come. As she walked toward the boarding gate, she noticed a small crowd gathering near the lounge's entrance. It was Sam, the young professional who had approached her earlier, along with a handful of other travelers who had witnessed the exchange. Sam stepped forward, holding out her hand. "Good luck at the summit," she said, her voice filled with genuine admiration. Amara shook her hand, offering a warm smile. "Thank you. And remember, you can make a difference too. It's not about big moments, it's about consistent choices." The others murmured their agreement, and Amara felt a swell of gratitude. These strangers had no obligation to stand by her, yet here they were, showing their support in small but meaningful ways. A platform for change. The flight itself was uneventful, giving Amara the time she needed to finalize her speech. By the time the plane landed in the city hosting the summit, she felt ready, not just for her presentation but for the impact she hoped it would have. The summit venue was a grand hall filled with some of the most influential leaders from around the world. As Amara took the stage, she felt a familiar mix of nerves and determination. She glanced at the sea of faces before her, some supportive, some skeptical. She began her speech, her voice steady and clear. She spoke about equity, about the hidden barriers that kept people from reaching their full potential. She shared statistics, stories, and solutions. But it wasn't until the end that she truly captured the audience's attention. "I want to share a story," she said, pausing to let the room settle. "Yesterday, I was in an airport lounge, preparing for this very summit. And despite having all the credentials to be there, I was asked to prove that I belonged. Again and again, I was questioned, not because of what I had, but because of who I am." The room fell silent, the weight of her words sinking in. This is the reality for so many people around the world. It's not about lounges or flights. It's about the spaces we're excluded from, the opportunities we're denied, the assumptions we're forced to battle every single day. And it has to stop. Her voice rose, filled with the passion that had fueled her career. We cannot afford to let bias, prejudice, and ignorance dictate who gets to belong. We have to do better, individually and collectively. Because when we uplift one, we uplift all. The room erupted into applause, some people even rising to their feet. Amara stood tall, letting the moment wash over her. This was why she did what she did, not for the accolades, but for the possibility of change. The legacy of a morning. As the summit wrapped up, Amara received countless messages of support, not only from attendees but also from people around the world who had seen the viral video. She knew the attention would fade eventually, but that didn't matter. What mattered were the seeds of change she had planted, seeds that others could nurture and grow. Later that evening, back in her hotel room, Amara reflected on the events of the past 24 hours. The morning in the lounge had been just another chapter in her lifelong journey, but it had reminded her of something profound. Every act of courage, no matter how small, has the power to inspire. And sometimes, the quietest battles, fought in airport lounges, boardrooms, and other everyday spaces, are the ones that leave the deepest impact. With that thought, Amara closed her laptop and allowed herself a rare moment of rest. Tomorrow, the fight would continue. But for tonight, she was at peace, knowing she had made a difference.